So after releasing my Lumix S9 video of why I wouldn't get one due to it not having a mechanical shutter, I had a couple people kind of comment talking about how having an electronic shutter is not so bad. While you're right, having an electronic shutter is not the end of the world, I wanted to compare it today with a mechanical shutter versus an electronic shutter to show you the difference today. And who knows, maybe it'll help you out to know if you want to get the Lumix S9 or maybe the A7C Mark II, whatever it might be, depending on if you want a mechanical or electronic shutter in your camera, and we'll see what happens. So this is some of the gear that we're going to be using today to show the differences between a mechanical to an electronic shutter. I want to use the Fuji X-E4 because it has a mechanical shutter for the compact size that it is, but also has an electronic shutter. So I'm just going to be trying to use it to have it in the scenario of how it would be for photography with it and without it, as well as using my Sony a7 IV because you can use the mechanical shutter and the electronic shutter if you put it in silent mode. That way I can show you the differences of what the importance is of it. I'm going to be using this for tennis photography so I can show you how it captures the images with the mechanical shutter versus the electronic shutter. That way you can see a little bit of the differences that way. I'll also be using my ZV-E1 to do a little bit more of the photography with it, just to showcase what it is to use basically the electronic shutter only with it, since that's the only thing it has, since it'll kind of assimilate a little bit to the Lumix S9 since it doesn't have any form of mechanical shutter. That way, it might help you out in the long run to see what could be the best option for you.
I'm gonna try it out without the good old shutter to see if it shows the nice warping. Electronic shutter.
So now that you've seen how it works with more sports photography, noticing that with having the mechanical shutter, you can actually freeze things more in time, and using the electronic shutter with the silent mode with the a7 IV, it tends to warp things a little bit, mainly because the sensor is just not fast at reading out. I know with the new Sony a9 III, it has more of a global shutter, so it'll kind of do everything in one go, which can help out with the warping of things as well with the motions. So one of the perks of having that camera. Now, are you going to spend that much money on a camera? Well, that's up to your budget, but that way you get an idea of a camera that has, just a silent shutter versus mechanical shutter so that you can see the differences of what it does within it. It'll have a little bit more warping. Sometimes depending on the light, it might have like a little bit of like the flickering issues, which we're gonna jump into that to use the Sony a7 IV with the mechanical to the electronic shutter as well, with using a little bit of light to see if we can get a little bit of the banding and everything, as well with the ZV-E1. So one of the things with having just an electronic shutter is that depending on the lights that you might have, it might have some flickering, which you can fix as well with the mechanical shutters and stuff. You can also do the anti-flickering, but having to do that method every time kind of gets quite annoying. So it's one of the differences from the mechanical to the electronic shutter. So I'm going to take a couple photos with the ZV-E1, then I'll use my a7 IV with the mechanical shutter and then without it, and then show you kind of like how it looks with the anti-flickering as well. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So this is with the mechanical shutter, 1, 2, 3. There we go. And then with the silent mode, 1, 2, 3. With the ZV-E1, right now with this one, I wasn't picking it up. It could be free because of the type of, the shutter or whatever it is and everything like that. But there's a setting that you can go into your menu and just do the anti-flickering and just kind of add it for the variable shutter. So that way it can, you can do the anti-flicker TV scan, and then it'll start, scanning to make sure that it gives you the best, shutter speed. So that way it's nicer. And that's basically the whole point of it. So that way you don't have a lot of the banding that the electronic shutter can do. But like I said, it's a little bit more of a hassle. And if you were able to tell in that video, you could see a little bit of the flickering lights behind her whenever I was even doing video. So like I said, sometimes it's a little bit of the frequency of the lights themselves, but having a mechanical shutter kind of helps out to minimize that as much as possible, especially kind of having these like little like kind of black lines between the photo itself, because it just sometimes happens, which with a mechanical shutter, I really tend to never deal with it. With an electronic shutter, if I'm shooting in silent mode, it tends to happen more often. So that's something to just kind of know whenever it comes down to between mechanical to electronic shutter. So now you might be thinking, well, that's not that big of a deal when it comes down to the mechanical and electronic shutter with the flickering of the lights, because you have the anti-flickering. Which, to be honest, it's kind of true. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but for some things, it's just kind of annoying to have to go the extra steps when you don't need to. For me personally, something that's cool with the Fuji is that it has just a good sensor overall. So with the readout of it, it seems to be pretty good, even with the mechanical to the electronic shutter, that honestly, half the time, I just leave it on aperture priority because of how the buttons are laid out in this one, that it's not as fast to be able to do it. And I tend to not have that many of issues. Granted, it does have the mechanical and the electronic shutter, so it kind of helps me out in that aspect. So now the main thing will be to go ahead and test these out and about with just taking some photos outside, because you got to see already how it looks with using more of the speed of, with sport photography, how the warping can happen with the electronic shutter, a little bit of the lights, but we're just gonna go ahead and take more examples to showcase outside how it'll look using the Sony a7 IV with the electronic shutter and the mechanical shutter, taking some with the Fuji, and then even some with the ZV-E1 if we need to. But that way you guys can see a little bit of an example why it matters to have a mechanical shutter versus, electronic shutter, depending on the type that you're, what kind of photos you're trying to take. So we're here in a parking garage just to do a little bit of photos, because I want to use these lights right there to showcase with the mechanical shutter versus the electronic shutter. And even using the variable kind of like for flickering, it has to use it with the mechanical shutter for this. So in a bit, I'll use it with the ZV-E1 and take some photos with the electronic shutter with that one. So that way we can see if we can fix it like that. But that way you see as well the difference from the electronic shutter to the mechanical shutter with some portraits with those lights behind me. Here you go, mechanical shutter, 1, 2, 3. And then this is with the silent shutter, electronic shutter. Shows the difference right there. Damn, it's crazy. But now we're gonna do the anti-flickering mode. So, but it cannot be used with apparently silent shutter. So we're just gonna 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is crazy, the difference right here. So that's with like the mechanical shutter, electronic shutter, mechanical shutter, electronic shutter. So I'm gonna use the Fuji real quick to show you with the mechanical shutter and then the electronic shutter to see how it looks as well. 1, 2, and 3. And then I'll keep it like that. And then I'm gonna do the electronic shutter, 1, 2, and 3. Now we're just gonna do a little bit with the mechanical shutter and then the silent mode with the Sony a7 IV to, kind of keep it all even out so you can see a little bit of differences between all of them. 1, 2, and 3. Do 1, 2, and 3. I'm gonna do in silent mode, 1, 2, and 3. And there we go. So basically those are the examples of what I kind of use for the electronic versus, mechanical shutter that are important to me, and maybe that'll help you out. I know there's gonna be somebody commenting saying, oh, but it depends on this and that and everything. And you're probably right. This is not a scientific testing. It's just more about what works for me, what I look for in a camera that could potentially help you out as well. For me personally, I have a lot of motion in my photos when it comes into my tennis academy and things of that sort. So I don't want to have a camera that the sensor isn't basically getting the good readout. I don't need an a7 IV Mark III, but my Sony a7 IV does the job with the mechanical shutter. So that's what I really like about it. Even my ZV-E1 can be fine whenever I'm in a pinch and I want to do a lot of video that day and I want to take some photos. It's perfectly fine. I've used it before and it's, you know, more than capable. But looking at the Lumix S9, a little bit of that sensor, I noticed a lot of banding and kind of like, you know, warping when it came down to a lot of the movement, which is something that I figured was going to happen because of it having just the electronic shutter, not really having somewhat of a mechanical shutter. And somebody told me that the Sony a7C Mark II also didn't really have a mechanical shutter, but it does have the settings. So, I mean, until I try one out, I'm just not really gonna worry about it too much. I just know that I wanna have a camera that if I'm gonna spend some money on that's supposed to be a good hybrid kind of style, I do want it to have good functions for the photos. Obviously having the anti-flicker motion whenever it comes onto the lighting and stuff is nice to have. The only issue, for example, with the a7 IV, you can't use it if you're using the electronic shutter, only to use it with the mechanical shutter from what I was trying to get into my settings. I'm able to do it with my ZV-E1 with it like that, so that kind of helps out a little bit. But it is an extra step that I don't want to have. But obviously if you want to do a little bit of the silent mode whenever you're taking like sports photography because you don't want to make too much noise, let's say, you are going to having those kind of warping effects with like the subject or anything like that that's too fast in motion, which probably will happen as well with anything that you're capturing like on the go. I saw a video from Cam Mackey, I believe is his username on YouTube, where he took a photo out the window on the, you know, when he was in the train for in Japan doing the Lumix S9, and it showed you how it was like bending and everything. So if that's not a big issue for you, I mean, an electronic shutter type of camera because you want to have the compact is never wrong. For me, having my X-E4 from Fuji, it shows that you can have a mechanical shutter within the camera. Granted, it is an aps-c, but it is also a lot smaller than the ZV-E1, the a7C Mark II, and the Lumix S9 probably. So I'm sure they can make it work somehow, but for now, just see whatever works out for you guys. But just want to do this a little bit of an example just because I kept having that discussion with other people. So I thought it was interesting enough to make a video out of it. But with all that said and done, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, share this video with a friend. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.